They came for me in broad daylight. Over the last few years, they've removed 9 toes, 12 teeth, 1 finger, and 3 feet of my large intestines. There are no scars. They leave no other evidence. They take what they want and leave me with less and less each time. Every visit diminishes me. People can't see them. Dogs can, though. Cats, too. Maybe birds. They'll howl or hiss or fly away, but that won't deter the visit. From what I've seen, nothing will. My right thumb was taken 4 days ago. I was walking to the supermarket and I felt the telltale prickles of static electricity cascading down the back of my head and neck. Pigeons in the area began to screech. The sense of weightlessness I'd grown to know and dread swept over me, and as I was lifted into the clear sky, I saw my replacement continue his walk. He always continues exactly where I'd left off. The people walking behind me didn't notice a thing. I know the long pull skyward is an illusion, perhaps even one for my benefit. That they can instantaneously place my replacement is proof of some kind of teleportation capability, but perhaps the sensation of travel is their way of easing my mind. If so, it's a strange way of doing it. Moments later, I'll feel the agony of every incision and every amputation as their machines work. Despite their best efforts, I am not and never again will be at ease. After my first abduction, I was deposited where my replacement had been. The physical transition was seamless, but the mental and emotional ones were not. For those sitting in the room with me, I went from laughing at a joke to shrieking and pulling off my shoes and socks to reveal my missing pinky toe. It was my abductor's first souvenir. At the hospital, my checkup yielded no issues. None whatsoever. In fact, I appeared to be in perfect physical condition, save for the missing toe. I was unsurprised when they wouldn't believe what I claimed had happened to me. I was kept overnight for observation, then given a prescription for anti-anxiety medication and discharged. I've been back to the hospital over a dozen times since. The doctors began to realize something was happening. They noticed the perfect seamless amputations and extractions of parts of me that previous x-rays showed were quite present at the time of the scans. The medical professionals were at a complete loss. As I mentioned, 4 days ago, my right thumb was taken. I didn't go to the hospital after I was deposited back into the kitchen of my home. 3 days ago, I lost my left hand. I was deposited back into my shower. The stump below my wrist was clean, white, and smooth. I did not go to the hospital. Two days ago, my penis and testicles were excised. The agony of the amputation was exquisite, hideous, and profound. The pain disappeared when I returned. I immediately went to the hospital, where I remained. The head of the hospital made many calls. No more than a few hours later, I was visited at my bedside by people in black suits. They made me sign documents that I'm invalidating as I type this. And before dawn this morning, I was taken again. It was the first time I was abducted at night. It was also the first time I saw the faces of my abductors. To attempt to explain the sheer, incomprehensible horror of their appearance would only blunt the reality of their form. No words exist in any human language to describe the feeling that laying my eyes upon them had invoked. The word incomprehensible dwarfs the word horror, as I'd never felt so frightened in my life. Not until mere hours ago. When I was returned, I knew nothing had been taken. The machines that had stolen so much of me had not been used. Something new had been employed. Something worse. Something alive. I was swapped with my replacement and found myself where I had been before. My hospital bed. I began to scream with a force that caused blood vessels in my eyes to burst. Before anyone could arrive, I started to feel what had been done to me. They didn't question my demand that they scan me. They didn't even hesitate, and when it was over, no one spoke. No one even looked at me. Their eyes were glued to the screens. 2 pairs of them began to leak tears down horrified faces. That was all the confirmation I needed. I'm typing this with the laptop I've been given to compose my last will and testament. But I have nothing to give and no one to give it to. This is more important. Please realize that during my most recent abduction, I saw many, many other people who had been taken, people of all ages and races from what appeared to be all over the world, and they were all undergoing the same procedure. I don't know how much longer I have. By the looks of the faces of the hospital officials and doctors who saw the scans, I can't imagine it's very long. Right now, if thousands of people around the world are experiencing what I am, things will get very, very bad very soon. While I wasn't given the opportunity to see the scans, I have all the evidence that I need. All 6 pairs of clawed legs are scratching in my abdomen from the inside. I could see my skin rising and falling as the pressure against it grows and what's inside gets stronger. No one, aside from doctors, hospital officials, and suited men, remains in the hospital. Everyone else has been evacuated. Believe my account or choose to ignore it. It's entirely your choice. I won't be around for whatever happens next, but you will. Right now, I feel more of me being taken as teeth inside of me are beginning to chew. It's gonna happen soon, and something tells me it's going to all go very quickly from there. Spots of blood are seeping through the sheets covering my belly. Please. Be ready. I never thought anything strange could come from this day. On a rather sunny day, I filled up the trash bin next to my street with the garbage that had been filling my home. I knew that the dumpster truck would be around soon to empty it, as it always has been every day. And seeing as I had nothing else to do with the morning, I decided that it would be the proper time to go for a quick 5-minute jog to the next block downtown. In fact, the temperature was the perfect spot so that I never really got too hot till the end of my jog. As I was walking back to my home as part of the cool-down, I was shocked at what I found. The trash in the bin had not been picked up, but rather was strewn all about the street. Bark's root beer cans were littered around the bin in a circle, along with various other bits of debris, and the black trash bag that I had placed the unwanted material into appeared to be emptied completely and was just laid on top of the can. Wondering what could have happened, I began to clean up the unexpected mess. However, as I was about to place one of the Barks cans back into the bag, it seemed as if the sack wasn't completely empty. I curiously peered into it to find an old Super Nintendo cartridge. I didn't remember throwing out something like that recently. In fact, every SNES game that I had ever bought before is sitting in my basement. I figured maybe whoever littered the trash everywhere did this, so I took the game out and examined it. What was on it surprised me. I know there's a lot of stories about games that have labels torn off or just suspicious-looking cartridges to begin with. However, this label actually seemed professional in the making. The only thing off about it was the premise of this game as shown by the label. The title of the game was simply My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic, similar to how it's titled just by the show's name on the iOS game. The Generation 4 character models were even present on the cartridge as well. Twilight Sparkle, Pinkie Pie, Fluttershy, and all of the other main characters were present. This was especially odd since this version of the show came out in 2010, which was way after the time of anyone making SNES cartridges for a profit. I then thought back to a particular game known as Battle Kid for the original NES. Someone had actually programmed that for an old system long after it was abandoned by most developers. In fact, the guy was even selling a physical copy of it to people for a small profit. After remembering this, I figured maybe it was some fan developer that wanted to share his or her creation with someone else. I was rather curious as to why it had to be done in such a messy manner, though. They could have just left the game on my doorstep. I would have gladly sat down to play it. As I was beginning to walk back into my home, I noticed that the back of the cartridge didn't feel as smooth as it should have. My fingers slid over a rough patch somewhere. I flipped this supposed game over as I noticed one piece of tape on the back. In black marker, and almost seeming as if it was in Times New Roman font, it read, "I'm sharing the magic. Signed, T.S." T.S. Those are the same initials as those of Tara Strong, the voice actor whose Twilight sparkle within the show that this game is based on. I thought that it was cool that whoever made this has also gotten the approval of one awesome voice actor as well. I remember seeing a saying somewhere once before that described, "Whatever Tara Strong touches turns to gold." And seeing as I've yet to see anything terribly bad come out of whatever she's a part of, I thought that that saying would have some merit in determining how good this game really was. I think I've rambled enough about how I managed to come across this game. I think it's time to describe what came from playing it. When I first booted it up, I was surprised to see that the 16-bit sprites within the game actually closely resembled what the 6 main ponies in the show look like. They were sitting in front of what is Fluttershy's home in the show. They seemed to be relaxing with a nice little picnic. Twilight was reading another book as usual. Fluttershy seemed to be resting along with her pet bunny Angel. Rainbow Dash could be seen just lying down on her back with some sunglasses on. Pinkie Pie seemed to be focused on, waiting for something to come out from underneath the picnic rag? I don't know. She's hard to figure out in the show, too. Rarity and Applejack just had their backs against a tree. All of this was covered with the classic logo which read, My Little Pony. Most impressive yet was the audio. It was a classic remix of Pinkie Pie's Smile song from the show, which is one of my favorites of all time. It always seemed to cheer me up on my worst days, and hearing it through an SNES sound chip was just beautiful. I knew this game actually had some effort put into it. After I was getting over the beauty of the Smile track, I pressed start to start the game. The first few screens explained the basic controls that I would have to use to get past certain obstacles. If anything, the gameplay was similar to what Trine had to offer, in which you would have to use all of your characters to get past certain obstacles. For example, Rainbow Dash would be necessary to remove thunderclouds and fly over things, while Fluttershy could be used to tame and walk past any large living creatures that you would happen to run past. Of course, the inanimate objects, along with several other threats, Twilight was always there to work her magic. Pinkie Pie was able to launch a party cannon attack, which somehow managed to turn enemies and projectiles into some sort of cake batter. Applejack's main purpose was bucking all the apples out of a tree for more food in the event that your party's health got too low. Apple trees were very rare in this game, though. It would only provide a maximum of 3 apples when bucked. And Rarity was simply used for the majority of stealthy portions of the game, in which you would have to get past a guard or avoid being detected, as you had to use one of several of her outfits to blend in with your surroundings. Now that I got that lengthy description out of the way, it's time to describe what's truly frightening about this experience. After playing through a majority of these levels for about an hour, I came across a level simply titled Stage 16. Stop. I thought that was odd. The way stop was written was also unnerving, as it almost seemed small drops of blood were dripping from each of the red letters. As the level faded into view, I was horrified by what I saw. Dead, lifeless trees that seemed more like Nintendo 64 graphics were appearing on the screen. The sky was also blackened with a slight hint of red. The ground that I had been walking on was gray instead of the lively colors that I had seen before. The character who was on the screen was Fluttershy, who seemed more worried than usual. The freakiest part of all this was the playing of the Smile song in reverse. This version wasn't even the 16-bit version from the title screen. It sounded like an actual instrumental of the song just played in reverse. I was beyond words at this point. Whoever made this game was a sick, twisted individual. Confused why there was a sudden change of atmosphere, I decided to move forward, only to see a giant, bony black hand come out of the ground and grab Fluttershy. She was crushed within the same instant, blood running into every direction. The game had never been this graphic with a character's death before. In fact, there was never any blood in the event that a character had temporarily fainted. Deciding to try a different approach to overcome the obstacle of the hand, I thought that I could use Rainbow Dash to fly well above and over it. However, to my horror, the hand reached up all the way to the blackened sky and still crushed poor Dash with that same grip that had gotten the best of me before. Maybe Pinkie Pie would help me accomplish something with an instant stroke of luck. Nope. She was crushed into a giant pool of blood as well. I tried switching to Twilight to see if I could use her magic to get across, but the game was bugged and would not let me at this point. I thought maybe I could use Rarity to get across with a camouflage disguise of sorts. No such luck. That camouflage was soon bloodstained. I tried switching to Twilight again, but she still wasn't selectable. Applejack was my last hope. Of course, she was crushed as easily as someone would bite into a single apple. I had given up all hope of beating this game, when the game suddenly put Twilight into control. In fact, I was no longer pressing any buttons. Twilight was just casually strolling past the spot where the other 5 members of my party were brutally crushed as if they were toothpicks. And after she reached the edge of the screen, a dialogue box appeared.
Princess Celestia was right! Friends really do come in handy when you need them.
After I pressed A to remove the dialogue box, the reverse smile song had stopped. And it was dead silent for about 10 more seconds. Then another dialogue box appeared.
Their potential was exceedingly great. It even felt so good to possess it for myself. I feel as if I can accomplish anything now.
What kind of sick madness was this? This was not the Twilight that I knew from the show. She would never harm her friends just for her own personal gain. Would she? Then Twilight turned directly towards me. I could see a red pixelated glowing in her eyes as she just stared at me intently.
I'm only merely doing what you've been doing this whole entire time. I'm using my friends as a means of escaping my current life. You've grown bored of your own life in the same way I have mine. It's time to move on.
Using them? How is anything that she's done even remotely compared to my feelings? Almost as if in response to my question, she's answered.
Your own life is empty, as was mine. You turned elsewhere to keep yourself entertained. You needed a purpose. I found mine, but it seems as if you still need to find yours.
At this point, a very disturbing image of Twilight was with an unsettling smile, just like the one scene in the episode of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic titled Lesson 0. That smile sent shivers down my spine when I saw it in the show. But this far tops what that detailed. Everything about this seemed as if a real-life photograph had been snapped with a high-quality camera. Her eyes were completely missing. Beyond each of the sockets was just a black void. The mouth was almost toothless. There was no tongue or any other features within it. Just a black void, as the eyes were. And at this point, text just splattered across the screen, almost as if each letter stroke was carved with a bloody knife. The text read,
I'm sharing the magic.
At this point, a loud, ear-piercing scream suddenly came out of my speakers. I covered my ears in a vain attempt to block out the sound, but it was still coming through. I fumbled with the power button on the SNES for a few seconds, and the sound finally stopped as the game was shut off. I ejected the game cartridge, and I left it sitting on my kitchen table. I knew that I had to share this experience with anyone, and I needed all the proof that I could get to show everyone my case was real. However, I felt really tired despite the time only being about 1 in the afternoon, so I figured a quick nap wouldn't hurt me too much. During this quick nap, I happened to have a strange dream. I felt like I was walking down a street in my original hometown of Ballville, Connecticut. I was just casually walking down the street when I stopped in front of someone's trash bin. I madly ravaged through the person's trash receptacle for whatever strange reason, littering all kinds of trash here and there. I also happened to take something out of a bag that I had somehow been carrying. That something was the cursed cartridge that I managed to come across earlier. And so far, the front label looked normal. But then it mutated into the shape of the frightening image of Twilight that I had described earlier. Scared to even look at it for more than a few seconds, I dropped the cartridge and ran away from the residence as fast as I could. And when I woke up from the dream, I was relieved that I was still in my house. However, the oddest part was that looking at my kitchen table, I noticed that the game was missing. But I could have sworn that I had left the game there. As I was madly searching around my home, I got frustrated and knew that it was futile to try searching for the game. But I was getting more and more stressed out with every minute. So I decided to take a break and check my email. My mother had sent me an email detailing a strange incident that happened to her home that morning. Someone had gone and messed with her trash just like what had done with me earlier. She made no mention of a game, though. However, I knew that she probably thought the game was just more garbage. She wasn't very interested in gaming to begin with. I didn't bother asking her about it, as it seemed like a weird question coming straight out of left field at the time. Plus, there was the slight fact that what I had dreamt about was actually what I had done. I don't know where the game is right now. Maybe it finally got hauled off to the dump where it belongs. Maybe my mother got a crazy idea to actually play it, and now she had to suffer the same torment that I did, while involuntarily passing it on to someone else. Whoever it is, be careful when you're playing it. If that Twilight had enough power to control people's actions in the real world, then who knows what she'll be capable of doing soon. Before you listen to this, make sure you're alone. If you're in a room, close the door. If you're by a window, look outside and make sure there is no one there. The only way others should know about this story is by hearing it themselves. Don't repeat this out loud to anyone. They'll hear you. But you are able to read it to yourself or record it yourself. Right now, these are the only two exceptions I know about. Once you think you're alone, look at the screen and do not take your eyes off of it until you're finished reading or listening to a recording. We will know if you look away. It started on Sunday, November 4th, 2012. I'm in my senior year of high school and I had a wonderful girlfriend. We were at my house mourning about school the next day and terribly bored. She came over so I could help her with a project that just had to be due the next day. I had hoped that we'd be able to fool around a little, but she needed this A, as she would fail the marking period. We finished around 8 o'clock. She didn't need to leave until 10. So we still had 2 hours with each other, and the only other person who was home was my little 8-year-old sister whom I had to babysit. My parents were at some dinner meeting until 10, but I knew them too well. They'd be home around midnight. I wanted to play it safe because they didn't allow my girlfriend over past 8. They were afraid that I'd be getting her pregnant or something. We went on the internet because there was nothing else to do. She wasn't in the mood to fool around, couldn't stand another homework assignment. The internet was the only means of escaping these dull hours. So we watched videos on YouTube for a while, looking up the newest popular videos until we ended up watching some creepypastas. We both had been watching creepypastas before we were dating, so we knew what to expect. We had a hard time becoming truly scared of them like we used to. We kept trying to find some that would scare us, but the videos we watched weren't as scary as we'd hoped. So by now it was almost 9:30. We were upset that none of the videos we were watching were creeping us out. We were about to give up on searching. I saw this unusual thumbnail. All it showed was a man standing with his head looking down and hair covering his face. Now, what was strange about the thumbnail was that there was no time limit or author, just a title that read, "The Man Who Looked Down." We both agreed that this would be the final video, and if it did creep us out, we'd give up. I moved my mouse to press on the video link, and the moment I clicked it, the video went into full screen, and the man I saw in the thumbnail was standing there. I moved my mouse around, trying to find the loading bar, but it wasn't there. I pressed escape on my keyboard to get out of full screen, but the screen didn't move. For a second, I thought the computer was frozen. But in the video, the man was standing in what seemed to be a front lawn of a house, one I'd never seen before. And the tree next to him was moving with the wind. My girlfriend and I had no idea what was going on, but I never took my eyes away from the screen because I felt like there was something I had to see, and if I took my eyes away for a moment, I would miss something. I didn't know how long my girlfriend and I stared at that man, waiting for something. It felt like a couple minutes. But while I was staring at him, I felt like there was something wrong. He was changing me. I actually felt scared. I don't know if my girlfriend felt it, but I didn't have time to think about it. Before I felt something grab my shoulder so tight the nails pierced my skin, I turned around to see the face of my father. He opened his mouth to say something, but was interrupted by my girlfriend's ear-shattering scream. I writhed back around, almost screamed myself. The man had looked up, and he must have run closer to the screen because all I could see was his face now, staring at me. The hair was out of the way to show his disgusting, disfigured face. His nose was torn on the left nostril, allowing people to look inside of the hole into his head. His mouth was open, larger than any normal human could bear. Part of his cheek was missing with a hole about the size of a large fist. He had no tongue, no top rows of teeth, only a bottom row of dark, chipped teeth that had been long since taken care of. But the part of his face that will never leave my mind was his eyes. They were half red, half white eyes. The half-white parts had red veins protruding out of them, while the red sides had white veins protruding. There was no sound, just him staring through the screen for a couple of seconds before my computer turned itself off. I looked at the clock, and it was 12:30. It was impossible. I was thinking it felt like 5 minutes. I looked back at my father, who also saw the face and seemed a little shocked himself. Pulled himself together and told my girlfriend to leave. She left without saying goodbye. My father then gave me a talk about disobeying and other shit, but most of the time I wasn't listening. I was too busy thinking about that man. He seemed to have moved the moment I looked away, which I couldn't understand how that could happen. It was also the fact that we started watching at 9:30 and had been interrupted at 12:30. We had been watching the man for 3 hours straight without looking away or blinking. As my dad was finished, I had to sleep. I wanted to talk to my girlfriend about the video, what happened. I woke up the next morning, something was out of the ordinary. It looked like a black smudge on my lawn. I looked again, it was gone. Shook it out of my mind, thinking it was just some stray cat, maybe a raccoon. I walked to the kitchen, I grabbed my lunch, started walking out the door to wait for my bus. At the corner of my eye, I saw something move. I turned quickly and ended up staring out of my kitchen window. I walked slowly towards it to look outside. When I reached the window, I looked around my lawn slowly, taking in as much detail as I could see. There was nothing there. I was starting to get scared until I heard the school bus stop outside. I ran out the door and raced to the bus. Once I reached it, I almost collided with the door. The driver opened it, and I walked into the shuttle. I sat down quickly and stared at my seat window. Everything was normal. I remembered as I was running toward the bus, I had that feeling of being chased. I felt like I was literally running for my life. I wanted to stop thinking about what was happening, so as the bus started moving, I looked away from my window and I decided I'll just listen to some music. But But just as my head shifted out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Something moved again. I looked back at my house just in time to see that man. A man standing on my lawn before the bus moved him out of my vision. His hair covering his face. As he looked down, I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? The man didn't do anything, not yet. He was just scaring me, but now, how did he find me? Did I know him? I needed to talk to someone about this, my girlfriend. I arrived at school and I waited till second period to talk to her. It was our only study hall together. And when second period arrived, she didn't show up. I asked her friends where she was. They said that she never showed up. I assumed she must have been sick. I just visited her after school. Her house wasn't that far away. This wasn't like her. Her project, the one we worked on last night, was due today. And if she was sick, she would have texted me, or maybe her friends. The moment the last school bell rang, I sprinted to her house. I knocked on the door. There was no response. I slammed on the door loud enough for the neighbors to hear me. Still no response. Even if she wasn't home, at least her mom would have been there after school. I tried to turn the knob, and surprisingly, it was unlocked. I opened the door slowly and I yelled in to see if anyone was home. No response. I yelled that I was coming in. I guess I didn't expect a response. I also didn't receive one. I walked into the darkness. All the lights were off. I felt the walls for the nearest light switch and I turned it on. The room was illuminated for a couple of seconds before the light bulbs burst. I'm still not sure about what I saw in those short seconds, but I thought there was a quick glimpse of a woman in the doorway to the kitchen. I found some curtains covering a window and I opened them. The room was now filled with sunlight. I looked towards the kitchen door and it was empty. I didn't go in. I didn't feel like I needed to yet. I went upstairs to my girlfriend's room instead. I opened the door to her room and I stopped. I was hit by some unexplainable, horrible stench. My eyes burned. Once my eyes were able to dilate, I saw her. In him. My girlfriend was on the floor, kneeling, looking directly at the man. Almost every inch of her body was sliced open, bloody. I just stood there, horrified at what I was witnessing. It seemed like an eternity of staring at that man and my girlfriend before she finally spoke. All she was able to say to me was, "I'm sorry." Then she turned around and looked at me, and her eyes, dear God, her eyes, they were sliced down the middle of each, making one half red and the other white. I only had time to hold out my hand to try to grab her before the man fell on her and started ripping off her skin and devouring her like a wild animal. Her heart-wrenching scream must have filled the entire neighborhood. I turned to run, but the moment I looked away, I got pounced on. That monster slammed me into the ground and started to rip off my skin as well. Each time, its fingers ripped into my flesh and shoved it into its horribly disfigured mouth. My screams were almost as loud as my girlfriend's. I didn't know how, but I was able to move myself and the monster towards the stairs. We toppled down them and I felt my arm break. The sounds of cracking bone filled the house. The monster fell off of me and I was able to get up and run towards the front door. The pain on my back and my arms was unbearable. I sprinted out the door and tripped onto the steps. I fell face first and collided into the concrete. My nose was broken. Skin on my face was almost completely torn off. I could see through one eye as the other was covered in blood. It was standing in the doorway. It was looking at me. I was unable to move. I was in so much pain. I wanted to die. I was sure that monster was going to kill me, but of course that didn't happen because I wouldn't be writing this, right? It just looked at me for a couple more seconds before finally saying 3 unforgettable words. "Don't look down." And then I blacked out. I woke up in a hospital 3 days later. So my nurse told me. I was still in horrible pain. Medicine helped to ease it a little. I've never saw my back since then. I'm sure the monster tore the skin off. It was nothing but bone. Police came to me to ask me questions about what happened. Tried to tell them everything, but as I continued to tell the story, it seemed more and more unbelievable. They thought I was crazy. They stopped the search for my girlfriend's killer days later because of unreliable evidence. The day they stopped the search was also the day I had gotten the news. My father had gone off-road and crashed into some forest. When the police found his car, he wasn't inside of it. His body hasn't been found to this day. I'm sure that man had gotten him. There was no one with my father, so the man probably devoured everything. I left the hospital months later with an almost unrecognizable face, a crooked back, broken mind. I went home only to find my mom. She'd hung herself. I didn't bother to call the police. I went straight to my computer to find that video. After backtracking through my history, I found it. The man who looked down. But it wasn't there. Removed. The video that had changed my life was gone. I gave up shortly after looking through the videos. I closed the web browser, started writing this, and halfway through writing this, I got an email. A video link. I knew it was the man, but I forced myself to click it. There he was. He was standing in front of another house, but this house was familiar. It was familiar because it was my house. I can hear his soft wheezing. I could smell his horrible death-soaked breath. I can feel his eyes staring at me. He isn't looking down. He's looking at me. He's looking for victims on the internet, and I'm writing this, telling this as a warning to everyone. Don't look for me. For once I get this story somewhere on the internet, I'll turn around and I'll look down. My only regret is leaving my little sister all alone. Please forgive me, Julie.
During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and there we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to the various homes that we had lived in when I was much younger. Most of these memories are unclear, pointless, chasing after another boy in the backyard of a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float on the creek behind the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania. There is one set of memories which remains as clear as glass, as though they were just made yesterday. I often wonder whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring. But in my heart, I know they're real. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine. Population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space. But it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute of my father's place of work. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least 3 weeks. It was horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mother brought me ginger ale and books several times a day, and these served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, his eyes, his crooked ears. But his mouth was by far the largest. "Kinda looked like a Furby," I said, as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look. "Furby. "What's a Furby?" he asked. I shrugged. "You know, the toy. The little robot with big ears. You can pet him and feed him, almost like a real pet." "Oh," Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity. "You don't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend." I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stopped by to check on me. "I lay under your bed," he later explained. "I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore." We didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. The third or fourth morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face. "I have a new game we can play," he said. "We have to wait until your mother comes back to check on you, because she can't see us play it. It's a secret game." After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under the bed and tugged my arm. "We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway," he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me to leave my bed without their permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out at the ground below. We were on the second story of the house, but it was on a hill, and from this angle the drop was farther than 2 stories due to the incline. "I like to play pretend up here," Mr. Widemouth explained. "I pretend that there is a big, soft trampoline below this window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather. I want you to try." I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. "It's a long drop," I said. "But that's all a part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if it was only a short drop. If it were that way, you may as well just bounce on a real trampoline." I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through the air, only to bounce back up to the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realist in me prevailed. "Maybe some other time," I said. "I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt." Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment. "If you say so,"